This book is titled Designing and Building Space Colonies, A Blueprint for the Future, authored by Martin Ettington, narrated by Martin Ettington. Copyright 2017.
Chapter Introduction. And then we see a picture of the inside of a space colony ring with the ground sloping upward. I've always been interested in space travel. Having been born in 1955, I grew up hearing and seeing news about the space race between the United States and the Soviet Union. Walking with friends to elementary school, we used to talk about the latest launch of the Mercury 7 like John Glenn and Scott Carpenter. Then I remember the first man landing on the moon in 1969. I was at Boy Scout camp and managed to watch the landing on a TV in the Scout store. That evening, we all assembled in the dining hall to watch the first moonwalk. It was really incredible. I even had a 4-foot-high detailed model of the Saturn V rocket in my bedroom. Contrary to what some conspiracy theorists say today, it was all real. The media was saturated with coverage. There were thousands of pictures of men on the moon and lots of live video. A couple of years later, in 1972, I was staying with my grandparents in Florida and watched the astronauts as they moved around riding their moon rover and collecting rocks. I had to become an astronaut. I became an engineer in the 1970s when I went to Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, Troy, New York. Some of our graduates had gone on to become astronauts themselves. In 1984, I was working for Hewlett-Packard in computer sales and had a chance to become part of the team covering Johnson Space Center and the contractors. This gave me the opportunity to visit all the buildings and see many aspects of manned spaceflight. I also met several astronauts and got to know one guy pretty well, later became an astronaut. David Wolf was on the Mir Space Station and did construction on the International Space Station. Also, sadly, I knew Judy Resnick, who was killed in the Challenger explosion in 1986. Saw Reagan's speech to NASA up close, too, for the memorial service. In fact, you can see me in the crowd on some historical footage of the event. Of course, I applied to become an astronaut too while living in Houston, but I only had a BS degree in engineering, not a doctorate, which would have given me a real chance. But I did get my pilot's license. As you can tell, I've always had a big passion about outer space. I must have read several thousand science fiction books in my life, many dealing with space travel. It is important to point out that most thinking about space habitats was done back in the 1970s, almost 50 years ago. I know from living through that era that there was an optimism in that time that most of us would live to go into space. The moon landings had just finished and everyone was thinking about the next steps into space in the 1970s. Nobody back then would have believed that we wouldn't go back to the moon even in 50 years. Take the movie 2001, which came out in 1968, which was right in the middle of the Apollo moon landings. One of the scenes showed a space shuttle with a Pan Am logo going to an orbital space station. Pan Am was a major international 20th century airline. This told people it was only a matter of time until everyone would be going to visit space stations. Now we know that the last 50 years we've seen a lack of interest in space and confusion about planning for the future. It is man's natural destiny to work and live in space. It's just the lack of vision which is the reason why we haven't visited the moon again after the first moon landings. Having recently started writing science fiction in addition to my other books, I've dealt with habitats in space too. It's an exciting possibility for the future of humanity. One of the biggest sources of my research is the online library at the National Space Society. It includes several of the classic books on space settlements fully online. This is at the URL www.nss.org/settlement/library.html. I haven't seen anywhere a good overview of the whole space habitat movement since the original ones were published in the 1970s. Sure, there are some new technical papers and lots of books by ex-astronauts, but no recent overviews of this whole area of space habitat conceptualization. So one of the main goals for this book is to provide an updated view of space habitat technology, given what we have already accomplished with the International Space Station and the directions of research into applicable space technologies today. I've also included some sections of a couple of my science fiction books which cover building and living in a space habitat to give the reader an experience of what living and working in space might look like.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?